Welcome back to Little Spark Big Impact podcast, where we ignite the passion of pediatric providers like you. I'm your co-host, Mika Mitchell, here with our co-host, Joe Schreiber. And as pediatric providers, we play a pivotal role in a child's development. We educate the support system that empowers caregivers, and we celebrate every victory, no matter how small. Each episode will dive into different topics and the latest research to help you make an even bigger impact with those you work with. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, this podcast will hopefully give you ideas to support the positive impact you can have in the lives of the children and the caregivers that you have an opportunity to work with. Our goal is to spark deeper thinking, reflection, and learning from each episode. Today's episode, we will be discussing data collection. Data. So Joe, as a pediatric provider, how important is data collection, and is it something that we should be concerned about or aware? What do we need to be aware of?
Yeah, this is something that I really come around to over the course of my career, is the critical importance of data collection as a component of evidence-based practice, right? So there's those four pillars of evidence-based practice: the research evidence, our own expertise, the clinical circumstances, and the family and patient values. And all that needs to merge together into the best clinical decision that we can make. And we do that based on data collection, right? We have history, systems review, tests and measures, and that helps us to form a good picture of what we're trying to accomplish in collaboration with the child and family. And so that initial phase of data collection can be really essential, or is really essential, of course, to help achieve the purpose. Is the child eligible for services or not? Or what is their baseline level of function, and how can we establish that so that we know and going forward whether we've made some progress or not? And I think that's the key there is once a child is in our physical therapy services, we're working with the family or with the child, that data collection, that ongoing information gathering is essential to help us determine if the path we've chosen, the ideas we have around intervention and various types of intervention activities, adaptive equipment, orthotics, on and on and on, all the decisions that we contribute to, whether or not they're working the way that we hoped or not. And I think the really interesting thing, I'm curious how this, maybe you thought about this too, Mika, is this sort of bias that we're all saddled with as humans, because we start from a sort of thought process, regardless of the episode or activity, of, yeah, I know what's going on. I'm smart. I have good ideas. I've read research. I've done continuing education. I have all this expertise and knowledge. And so what I've decided, or what I've chosen in terms of intervention or activities for a child and family, is the way to go. And so we're biased that things are going to work. And so maybe that influences our data collection a little bit, in the sense that we're looking for things that confirm that, and things that don't confirm that we disregard or avoid or whatever. So it's something that I think we all are challenged with as practitioners, as humans, really. And it's something that I think can be a real pitfall if we're not careful and attentive to it when we're thinking about our clinical practice. So I don't know, Mika, if that how that resonates with you, or if you've had any additional thoughts, any experiences related to that.
I think that is so important. As we talk about, you rattled off all of these important parts of data collection and getting this objective information. And I think, as providers, when we're sitting with the family, part of this evidence-informed practice is, what are their values, right? And so if we already come in thinking, oh, we know what this family wants or needs, without taking the step back and say, you know what, let's acknowledge it from the beginning. Like, I am knowledgeable in my area, but I have to yield some of my knowledge, just like my confidence and my knowledge to this family, because they are the experts in what they want and what they need. And you know what? Potentially, every patient that comes to PT, maybe they don't want PT. They want to know how to help their child move better in a functional way. And so sometimes it's not that they need all of this intervention, it's we have to sit and listen to what is it that they need. And I think starting from the beginning with every interaction, a step back and say, you know what, I may not know what's best for this family until I listen to what they need. And then I bring my clinical expertise and my experience to see how that aligns up with what it is they need. And then pulling in the evidence or in whatever variation of that. But I think us leading with we are the source of all answers becomes problematic. And I think our bias sees absolutely can move into the action that could be harmful. But if we are aware of that, we can step back and say, you know what? I need to listen, and I need to listen during this objective, because this whole time I'm collecting data. I'm watching what's happening in front of my eyes. I'm listening to what this family is telling me, what this child is saying, and just being able to truly take this objective approach of, based on what they're telling me, based on what I'm gathering, then I can come in and make some connections as to what's going on and what is it I want to do. And I think, you talked about these different types of data. What does that look like for you?
Well, I think it's just what you said. I think that history, kind of communication, building that therapeutic alliance, that connection with children and families is dependent upon data collection and as unbiased a way as possible. I think that's the sort of essential first step, as you mentioned, and it's an ongoing step, right? So we're not just doing that with our initial history during that first session or even the first couple sessions, but in an ongoing way, continuing to listen and engage with the family. And I think too, it's this balance, which I think makes our profession really unique and really challenging sometimes, is that balance between the expertise that we do bring, that families are coming to us for, and also acknowledging, as you said, the family's expertise in their own needs and their child and those sort of things. So navigating that can be really challenging. You don't want to go and swing the pendulum to the complete other end and sort of say to the parents, do whatever you want or whatever you think. I mean that they're coming to us for some level of guidance and expertise. So acknowledging that and using the information that they're sharing our own information, our own expertise in kind of consistent ways is really important. Now, I think a really important piece of that is that, the knowledge that we have as we're gathering data, we are interpreting and analyzing that in the context of that expertise, and then providing information to the families to help them continue to learn and to make the best decisions that they can. So it's a really complex, and in almost each family in each situation, I think pediatric physical therapists know this really well, is unique. And no two families are going to present in an identical way. And so making that effort each time in a consistent way and bringing our expertise in is one of the biggest challenges of our profession. And so then, that data, both the history and the communication, I mentioned systems review. So sort of a quick screen of the various systems, gathering information that then funnels our additional sort of expert level data collection choices. It's all really essential pieces of the process. So for example, a child comes in with cerebral palsy or with a suspected diagnosis of cerebral palsy, that sends us down a road based on our expertise. And then the family's information can influence that or shape that, but it still sends us down that road of, here are some typical outcome measures that we're going to use for a child with cerebral palsy. So gross motor function measure is a really excellent tool for children with cerebral palsy. And we know this. Families are coming to us because we know this, and because we can use that tool to help inform our understanding of this particular child and family relative to other children with cerebral palsy, and to help inform decision making both in the short term and in the long term. So, kind of sort of a classic example there, but that's true for all children, all ages, all clinical presentations, that we have this, kind of toolbox that helps us to form a really accurate picture, and then make some decisions from there. So yeah, I guess that's my kind of response there. I'm curious to hear how that resonates with you, or what your thoughts are when you're encountering similar types of brain cell activation with clinical situations.
Yeah, I think all of that. And you brought up, I love listening to Joe, because I'm like, oh, yes, and that. Or the reminders of, yeah, I'm doing these things, or I need to be aware of these other things. And to your point, you talked about therapeutic alliance and communication. And I think as healthcare providers, I feel like the burden is on us to communicate, to share, and be forthcoming with the knowledge that we have. Because you said, like, that someone is coming to a physical therapist for a movement need. And so, as the movement experts, we absolutely should say, okay, based on my experience, based on the research, based on what's available to us, either what's available theoretically or what's available in this clinic right now at your house or wherever we're at in this moment, just being able to communicate what it is you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, what you're looking for. Because if we hoard all of that and we just do the things, you're not building that alliance. When people understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, you get that buy-in, you get that connection, and you may get more information than from when you just started asking, these yes or no, or, some of these open-ended questions. And I think that communication is important, because the more alliance that you can build faster, that helps you even with your funnel of where I think I want to go with this kiddo. Because if I believe, that we're wanting to improve this, maybe the quality of their movements, and the family is like, hey, I really just want to get them out going with whatever assistance they need. How it looks, it's fine, it's just we need them moving. I feel like those are different paths that you might take on what you're truly focusing your interventions on. And I think back to us knowing what's out there, right? We have this due diligence to stay aware of what's available. If it's, you talked about doing a systems review, right? I feel like you have to do that within the body, but then you also have to do that. You have to do your review of what's available in evidence and in the research, or where things are shifting, and clinical practice guidelines that kind of that are coming out more frequently, I feel like, for pediatric PT, give us some guidance in the direction that we should be taking as it pertains to suspected diagnoses or confirmed diagnoses. And those paths can be different, absolutely, based on what the goals of the family are. And I think, if we could talk a little bit about like the purpose of those testing, because as we grow in our knowledge base of, oh, I can see that, and I think this might be this, but how do you advise like being able to look at, I need to do an outcome measure, I want to collect this objective data, and I have to decide what type of test I'm going to do. So looking at the options, how would you best help somebody in navigating, when do you pick an outcome measure that's for evaluation or for prediction, or for some other reasons that you might choose?
Yeah, but before I go to that, I thought one of the other things in terms of systems that we really need to talk about or ask about in that either history or that section of our data collection is the environment, right? What's going on at home? What are some of the perhaps challenges and resources or strengths that families have in the home situation that we perhaps need to consider or address as part of what we're trying to accomplish. So for sure, all those other aspects and the social determinants of health plays an important role here. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, I think, but yeah, that information as well speaks to family challenges and resources and things along those lines that we may need to help to address as we're going through our data collection. So absolutely a critical piece there across the board, right? And throughout our time with families that we need to be considering. I don't think we need to ask about social determinants of health, every session that we're working with a child, but at some reasonable frequency based on the clinical situation and all the other factors that are involved there, that you are checking in reasonably periodically to make sure those challenges maybe don't emerge or influencing what we're trying to accomplish. So that's a little bit of a tangent. I think to come back to your question,
necessary tangent.
Yeah, the purpose of the exam, right? That drives. So a lot of times an initial examination is to establish eligibility, or does this child have a diagnosis, or does this child seem to be in need of physical therapy services. So that's a kind of a yes, no. And we have to make a yes, no decision there. A really challenging thing. A 3-year-old comes in or a 2-year-old comes in and the family has some concerns, and again, speaks to the really unique and uniquely challenging profession that we have all chosen. So does this 2-year-old or 3-year-old need physical therapy? Are they eligible for physical therapy services? So that most of the time we're going to choose a multi-item norm reference test is the phrase, so that we're comparing that child to other children their age, their chronological age, and then deciding, is this child different enough in some way that they would benefit from physical therapy services. So the classic, Peabody or the TEL or Bailey a lot of times are used in an early intervention assessment. I think the TIMP is another one that you can use before 4 months of age. So there are a number of those for early childhood, and then sometimes it's a child who's a little bit older, and some challenges emerge perhaps, and so then something like the Brunick's would be a norm reference test. Those are kind of classic, and I think when people think about outcome measures, tests and measures, those are some of the things that come directly to mind, and certainly they have their role. One of the challenges with those, though, is that they are not necessarily as sensitive. Once a child is eligible, they're not sensitive to change over time. So if your purpose shifts to, I want to see if this child is improving, doing the Peabody repeatedly or the Brunick's repeatedly might pick up on those changes, but really not designed for that. So it shouldn't be used that way to make it can inform that clinical decision, but to sort of completely hang your hat on something like that. Classic evaluative measure. So you can use the gross motor function measure to measure change over time in gross motor skills. It's designed for kids with cerebral palsy. There's some evidence you can do that also with kids with Down syndrome. So to measure change over time, that's a really nice tool. Another one that I like, that I think cuts across all areas of clinical practice, that I wish more physical therapists used, is called the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure, or the COPM. And that's it's like really a classic sort of participation activity level test and measure that requires that therapeutic alliance, that conversation, but it formalizes it in a way that allows you to measure change over time for goals that are identified by the child and family. So you can look at establishing a baseline and come back and measure change over time. I have a clinical example just the other day in a setting that I've been working in where I wish the infrastructure was set up for the COPM, but it isn't. It's not a tool that's used at that particular clinical situation, and so it's not meaningful to the other members of the team and the other members of the clinic space. And so, but the parent had identified really specific goals for their child. And we had to kind of configure that into a goal that fit the setting. And the parent really wasn't happy with that because the goal was a little bit removed or not as sort of directly pertaining to that. So it's a challenge, I recognize, for clinicians to go out there and implement some of these ideas when maybe the infrastructure or the setting isn't. So it's that like knowledge translation piece I think we talked about too, is like, how do you move clinical practice? So it's a challenge for me personally, right? How might I move that clinical site and colleagues there to considering and actually using the COPM on a more consistent basis? And I'm working on that. It's easier said than done, but yeah. So
yeah, and I think you brought up some great points and things to consider, because you're practicing for how long, right? For so many years, and you're like, I'm encountering a systems issue, right? And so some of this it's not necessarily that you don't want to, is how would you incorporate this? And I think part of this conversation should be like the value of having this conversation without an immediate solution. So you bring forth an idea and hold space for a discussion about it. Like, can we talk as a clinic of who we are and what is our purpose? Like, we're here to serve these kiddos within the settings that we offer. And what if we're not doing that the best way? That's not all, like, people don't always want to have that discussion because, back to what you said earlier, oh, we're doing the best for the kids, period. But you might not be. And I think just those reassessments of, what is it that the families are saying that they need? Because if we don't ask them, we would just assume that, they're coming to therapies, they're getting interventions, they may or may not be making progress, but, we keep the cycle going and it's all good, versus like truly looking at what is out there to utilize. Are we using it? Why or why not? And, could we maybe look at a plan to implement those kinds of things? And to your point about, why are we doing these different outcome measures? I remember in clinical practice early on, this is to the point of our bias and our assessment of our abilities, right? As a young practitioner, I saw a kiddo, I did an evaluation based on what the family was saying. We had him do a couple of things, and I was like, this kid doesn't need physical therapy. But to my, I guess a good point was, I did do a norm reference outcome measure. I was just giving feedback to this family, throughout it, like, oh no, they're doing great. Everything's looking good. You know what? I don't think you'll need physical therapy, but I'll follow up with you after I score this test. Well, then I scored the norm reference outcome measure, and I was like, oh, based on what this says, I now have to call back, so tuck tail, and have a conversation with the family. Like, you know what? I know what I said. I won't do that again. Let me check this test first before we have this conversation. But just having some confidence in what was done to create a norm reference test, whether you respect the norm population that was utilized, if you're going to use a test and have confidence in it, you're going to say, like, look, when I give this test, I have to score this. I have to look at the results and say, you know what, based on the range that this child is functioning in, they actually could benefit from some PT. And then looking at where were the areas that they struggled, to decide, like, what are those impairments? And so I think just always, I appreciate a norm reference or a criterion reference outcome measure, because somebody did the work for me. They did the work to figure out what are these bounds that we're utilizing to make recommendations. And, you talked about these norm reference outcome measures. And I think as pediatric providers, I hope we are looking at some of those either single test outcome measures or criterion reference. So I want to compare this child to themselves over time. I think there is value in that. And, our adult colleagues use the timed up and go. Guess what? We can do that too. We want to do the timed up and down stairs. We want to look at these things that are going to tell us from today, this is how this patient performed. Because in life, this is a competition. Like we are measuring ourselves to ourselves. And I think we should be able to do that with our patients and say, you know what? Based on where you were last week, this is where you are today. And you're making progress with these same criteria that we utilize to assess.
Yeah, when you said those parameters too, I think that like your whole kind of clinical example there. So the child that you were working with looked good, doing a lot of good things, right? But when you looked at the parameters, I actually scored a little bit lower than we would hope. And so maybe justified a little bit different clinical decision than what you were thinking. Same thing with those criterion reference measures, like the tug or the timed up and down stairs, gait speed, I think of it as another one, the gross motor function measure, even the COPM. So the term or the phrase for those is like the minimal clinically important difference, the MCID. Some of those have those. And so when you score the child over time, if the score isn't exceeding that MCID, isn't exceeding that parameter, then perhaps the child isn't changing and making the progress that we would hope on those particular areas. And if that's the case, then it goes back to that bias thing. Maybe I chose a little bit of an incorrect path here in terms of the intervention, or maybe there's some other factor that we need to take into consideration when they aren't making progress. If they are making progress, fabulous. And that's when, either way, we should be sharing that data with families and with children to sort of reinforce what it is that we're recommending. So they're not making progress, maybe we need to make a little bit of a change, or they are making progress. So let's keep doing what we're doing because it's working and it's working well. So, and that I think families really appreciate. I'm not sure we do that as much as we could in clinical practice. And I think to your point too about those conversations with our colleagues in whatever clinical setting we are really important. And it's like everybody gets a little defensive, like what I'm not doing, or we need to change, or I've been doing this for blah 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 years and blah blah blah, and so. But if we're not like willing to accept the possibility that maybe we could improve in certain areas, then I don't think we're being as professional as we could be. The other thing too is a classic, right? You go and take a continuing education course and some new technique or new orthotic or something comes along and you're all excited and you want to, okay, great. But I'm glad you're excited about it. I'm glad that it sounds like it's going to work, but you really have to sort of be agnostic about whether or not it does work, because if you come into it again with that, this is new, this is great, this is exciting, this works, then your data collection can really be suboptimally influenced by that mentality and that and I just want to one last caveat too is that I don't want people to sort of take away that they're not doing things right, or that this is a we're sort of wagging our finger here at all the problems or that sort of thing, because I think most of what we do does work well, but there's room for improvement in my opinion, and how we sort of determine that and then justify it, share it with whoever else needs to know about that.
Yeah, I think that's important too, but the conversation, and I think being willing to have the conversation, and like you said, share with the people that you're working with, anybody that's on that team with you with that kid, to say, you know what, this is what we're working toward, and we're not seeing what I think we should be seeing. And continuing that conversation is helpful. And I think, even with our colleagues, having that growth mindset, right? Like we can continue to grow. We can continue to grow. So even if we're doing what's great right now, what's on the horizon, or what are some things we might need to continue to upskill ourselves on so that we can truly be giving those families that we serve the best within what the constraints are, right? You can't do certain things in a home environment that you can in a clinical environment, and vice versa. What you're going to do in a school is going to be different. If you're in a rural area with limited resources, it's going to be different. But having that conversation of, what, this is what's available to us, this is what is out there for the possibility, and based on what their goals are, I think that continued conversation, that it doesn't have to look like anybody else's version, as long as it's going to meet the need that's in front of you. And I think giving yourselves that permission to say, like, what, I might see some things on the social media feeds, and what, that's not right for my patient, and I have to then maybe educate them as to why you may or may not want to choose that for your intervention, or for the approach that we're taking, or for equipment that you might want to have, and be okay with, what, maybe you disagree, but at least you shared your clinical expertise and your opinion. And once you build that patient practitioner alliance, I think that helps it go further, where, what, maybe it's tough for you to hear the feedback that a family would give you, or for them to hear the feedback that you would give them. But having said it in a way that you're bringing, your intentions are for what's best, and not in a condescending way, or not in a judgmental way, but just like, hey, in an objective way, right? We've collected this data objectively. I got to state the facts to you objectively, with or without my bias. Like, hey, I'm trained in this, and I would say that there's a role for this there, but I could also do it another way. And I think part of that, that conversation should be done. If anybody says you got to do this one way, or the highway, this one piece of equipment, this one intervention, then you said it before, like, you have to be a little bit agnostic. Like, I look at everything with an objective lens, right? We're critical thinkers, and to be able to use that funnel that you talked about before, we're using all of this stuff to filter it out, but being very forthcoming with, what, I would love to try this thing, and maybe we could try an idea that you have, and see, because it's all science. It's all an experiment to see what's going to be best. Any last thoughts you have for data collection?
Not really. I think we've said it all, Mika. Clearly, this is an enormous topic, and there's so many really interesting aspects to it. But I think this hopefully sparked a little bit of brain cell activation, and people who are listening and love to continue the conversation with anyone, really. As I said, I just think this is such a critical aspect of practice of what we do.
Absolutely. So hopefully one of these points sparked something, and it will ripple into some impact, big and little impact in the future. So join us for the next episode. Like, subscribe, follow, do all the things so that you stay connected, and you're aware of when we continue these pediatric conversations. Thank you.